Um, One of the ways, or the first way that I met Roger was when I ran the European programme at Chatham House. And one of the things that Chatham House was always really keen to do was foster bilateral relations with sister institutes, but then by definition as well, with politicians, business people, academics in other European countries. And so Roger came on one of the visits we did to, I think we must have done an Anglo-Italian bilateral. And one of the things that I think over the years has been most important for me is personal relationships. That there's a tendency to think that, well, that for those who've been so reluctant to support European integration, that somehow it's about bureaucracy, it's about pen pushing. Whereas to me, Europe has always been about personal relationships, about friendships, but then beyond that, building up relations that work to enable us to do things politically as well. And for me, I think the hardest thing is going to be the fact that it's not just going to be automatic to be able to get on the Eurostar, to get on a plane and be with friends and colleagues, because for all of my professional life, Europe has been the focus of what I do, but it's also been much more than a job. It's been very much my life. That I started studying European politics by chance as a student in Oxford. I happened to read a piece on European elections being second order elections as a final year undergraduate. And in the arrogance of youth, I thought, I'm sure I could do better than this. Now, the piece was by Karl-Heinz Reif and Hermann Schmidt, who wrote the seminal piece on second order elections. Of course, I've never done any better than them, but it fostered an interest in European politics. And that built into academic study, following the European Parliament, and building up a whole set of networks, which have been hugely important in my personal and professional life. And that sort of network is going to be so much harder for my students to build up. That as an academic, I have had generations now of students coming from other European countries to study in Cambridge, and British students going elsewhere. And the loss of free movement is actually going to make everybody's lives much poorer, not necessarily financially, although I think there is going to be a financial loss, but in terms of the opportunities that so many of us have had. And I had the misfortune of spotting Ian Duncan Smith on the television earlier. And he said, oh, if only I were 21 again, all those opportunities for the young people. And I sat and wept, because to me, those opportunities were ones that I had when I was 21. Ian Duncan Smith could have had when he was 21. The opportunities simply to move, to study, or to be on holiday, to think that you could go and work in other places. And they were opportunities that were open to everybody. And at the moment, it's quite difficult to think how we're actually going to keep the relationships that we've had over the last 40 or 50 years engaged, and how, as British people based in the United Kingdom, we can keep on doing what we have done and ensuring that young students and school children are actually going to be able to have some of the opportunities that we've had. And over the last couple of days, I've had people saying, well, can you see any bright point? Is there anything positive that's coming out of Brexit? And the straightforward and honest answer is that I can't see any obvious upside to Brexit whatsoever. I don't really understand this obsession about sovereignty that has been the driver for so many of the politicians pushing for leave. I understand why some people voted to leave, but this obsession with sovereignty means very little to me. And I think the opportunities that are being lost are far greater than anything that we're going to gain. One of the things that I think is most depressing is the idea that somehow having taken back control, allegedly, the governments then said, we don't even want to be part of Erasmus. We don't even want to allow young people some of the opportunities that some people, even those who were voting leave, will have had. And I think one of the few areas where there is a bit of an opportunity is the fact the government said, yes, we'll still stay as part of the successor to Horizon Europe. So one very small area of opportunity. What I find most galling, perhaps, is the fact that the Prime Minister's father, today, the day we're finally leaving the European Union, or we're going to move beyond the transitional period, says he's now going to take up his right to French citizenship. And for those of us who don't have an opportunity to look to a second citizenship, to be stripped of our rights as EU citizens is incredibly painful. And for me and for my Lib Dem colleagues in the House of Lords and in other parties as well, one of the things we kept saying immediately after the referendum was how vital it was to ensure the rights of EU nationals resident in the United Kingdom. We've got part of the way with that, but not really far enough. And I think there is still a huge amount of work to do, because some of the rights are going to be in place for those people who are currently resident in the United Kingdom, but there are still a lot of question marks. And so there is a lot of work to be done for politicians and for academics to try and make sure that we can guarantee that those EU nationals resident in the United Kingdom are going to be treated fairly and with respect, because one of the greatest concerns in recent years has been looking at the Windrush generation and trying to ensure that we don't allow similar things to happen to EU nationals. And one of the things I think that made us most angry was listening to the government minister, Baroness Williams, who in many ways is splendid. She is a thoughtful, knowledgeable minister. But to suggest that somehow allowing some sort of paper document to give to EU nationals with settled status was somehow going to be a problem, I think seemed both naive and heartless. And so one of the things that we need to do is ensure that everyone who is here does have a sense of security. And we need to keep pressing the government to make sure that the guarantees that they claim to be giving are actually met. But the flip side is the rights of UK nationals resident in other countries. And that again is something that I think the government hasn't done enough about. So at the moment, with less than an hour to go before the UK's new relationship begins, I confess that I'm not feeling as optimistic as I would like to feel at the start of a new year. The only thing that I can say that's really positive is that this is at least the end of 2020. And there are very few people who I think have said 2020 is the best year of their lives. With the exception of some of my friends and family who've got new babies, for example, there are relatively few people that think 2020 has given us anything very positive. And I think what we need to think about is at 11:11 UK time, a minute past midnight European time, that we actually look to the start of a new relationship, because the fact that we have a deal means that we have a starting point to rebuild, to build on the relationships we've already got, to look at bilateral and multilateral relations with the other EU 27, because with a deal, we've at least got a starting point. It's a very thin arrangement, but we haven't completely broken our ties. And what I would really hope is that we can encourage school children, students, still to be thinking about engaging in exchanges, learning languages, and understanding that mutual understanding and building of trust is something that is just as vital to us with the UK outside of the European Union as it was within the European Union. So I think that we shouldn't just be thinking about the UK-EU relationship at an institutional level or at a very high level, we need to think about that as individuals as well. So I'm very much hoping that in the coming year, I'm going to be able to visit my many friends and former students in other EU and EEA countries. And I hope that many of them are going to be able to come and visit me, and that we can keep working as Europeans, because just because I've lost my EU citizenship doesn't make me any less European after 11 o'clock tonight. And I very much hope and pray that we can all continue to work together as we have, and as I've been doing for the whole of my professional life. And for most of my life since I first went on an exchange to France when I was 14, that changed my life. And I hope that's going to be possible for future generations. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Roger and hope sorry, he did also want me to be looking at the chat, so I hope I haven't missed anything, but I think I'm going to hand back to Roger and let him then carry on. Thank you.
Thank you so much.